The words hit me like ice water as I stood frozen behind the funeral home's heavy oak doors. Finally, the old bat is gone, my husband Marcus whispered to his brother, their voices carrying through the hushed hallway. Now we can get our hands on that trust fund. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I pressed myself against the wall, my black dress suddenly feeling like it was suffocating me. Through the crack in the door, I could see Marcus adjusting his tie with the satisfied air of a man who thought he'd just won the lottery. My father's body lay in the casket not 30 feet away, and my husband of 12 years was celebrating. How much do you think it is? Derek, his younger brother, asked with barely concealed excitement. The old man was loaded, right? That pharmaceutical company, the real estate investments. Marcus glanced around to make sure no one could hear them. If only he knew. Margaret's never been clear about the details, but I've seen the quarterly statements he used to leave lying around. We're talking 8 figures, minimum. Maybe 9. My hands trembled as I clutched my purse, the funeral program crumpling in my grip. 8 figures. 9 figures. They were discussing my father's life's work like it was a prize they'd won in some twisted lottery. And Margaret doesn't suspect anything? Derek's voice dropped even lower. About the business loans? The investment fund you've been skimming from? The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. Business loans? Investment fund? I'd been so trusting, so focused on caring for my ailing father these past 2 years, that I'd let Marcus handle all our finances. He'd told me his consulting firm was struggling, that we needed to be careful with money. Meanwhile, I'd been living modestly, even selling some of my mother's jewelry to help with household expenses. She's too naive to suspect anything, Marcus chuckled, the sound making my stomach turn. Sweet, trusting Margaret. Always so focused on taking care of everyone else that she never pays attention to what's happening under her nose. By the time the will is read, I'll have covered my tracks. She'll never know I've been borrowing against her inheritance. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Borrowing. As if taking money without permission could be called borrowing. What about the pharmaceutical patents? Derek pressed. Didn't the old man develop some kind of revolutionary treatment before he retired? My father had been Dr. Richard Stonehaven, a biochemist who'd spent 40 years developing treatments for rare genetic disorders. His work had saved thousands of lives, and yes, it had made him wealthy. But more than that, it had made him proud. Every dollar he'd earned had come from helping sick children, from giving hope to families who had none. The patents are worth a fortune, Marcus confirmed. Margaret mentioned them once, but she doesn't understand the value. She thinks they're just old research papers gathering dust. Once I have control of the trust, I can license them properly. Make real money instead of letting them sit there doing nothing. I had to bite my lip to keep from crying out. Those patents weren't gathering dust. Dad had specifically structured his will to ensure the treatments remained affordable, that the patents would be managed by a foundation he'd established. The money was meant to fund further research, to help more children. It was his legacy, his life's work made manifest. Genius, man, Derek was saying. She'll sign whatever you put in front of her. She's been doing it for years. That was true. And it made me sick to realize it. I had been signing whatever Marcus put in front of me. Trust documents, business papers, insurance forms. He'd always explained them as routine paperwork, necessary for his consulting business or our joint investments. I'd trusted him completely, never questioning his expertise in financial matters. The best part, Marcus continued, his voice taking on a cruel edge, is that she actually thinks I love her. 12 years of playing the devoted husband, and she still believes I married her for love instead of her father's money. The words hit me like physical blows. 12 years. Our entire marriage. Had any of it been real? She was such an easy mark. Derek laughed quietly. Plain, bookish, desperate to be loved. You played her perfectly. Plain, bookish, desperate. I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror, seeing what they saw, an unremarkable woman in an ill-fitting black dress, graying hair pulled back in a simple bun, no makeup to hide the lines that had appeared around my eyes. When had I become this person? When had I stopped caring about how I looked, about my own needs and desires, I knew the answer. It had been gradual, starting when Dad was first diagnosed with early-stage dementia 3 years ago. I'd thrown myself into caring for him, managing his medical appointments, handling his affairs. Marcus had been supportive at first, or so I'd thought. Now I understood he'd been positioning himself, learning about Dad's wealth, planning his approach. Once the old man was out of the picture, Marcus was saying, it was just a matter of time. Margaret's been so focused on being the dutiful daughter that she never noticed how much access I was gaining to the family finances. Access he'd gained through me. Every time I'd asked him to help with Dad's paperwork, every time I'd been too tired or overwhelmed to handle the financial details myself, I'd been giving him exactly what he needed. And now? Derek prompted. Now we execute the final phase. The will reading is next week. I've already prepared the papers for Margaret to sign, giving me power of attorney over the trust. She thinks it's just standard procedure, making sure we can access the funds for estate taxes and funeral expenses. My throat felt like it was closing. Power of attorney. If I signed those papers, Marcus would have complete control over Dad's entire estate. Everything Dad had worked for, everything he'd built to help sick children, would be in the hands of a man who saw it as nothing more than a personal ATM. She'll sign, Derek said with certainty. She always does. Of course she will. She's been trained well. 12 years of conditioning, of making her feel like she needs me to handle the complicated stuff. She actually thanked me last week for taking care of all the boring financial details so she could focus on her father's care. I remembered that conversation. I had thanked him. I'd been grateful, actually, thinking I was lucky to have a husband who would shoulder such burdens. The irony was bitter enough to choke on. What about the daughter-in-law angle? Derek asked. Won't people find it suspicious if you suddenly start making major changes to the old man's plans? Marcus's laugh was low and confident. That's the beauty of it. Everyone knows how devoted Margaret was to her father. If she signs over control to her husband, people will assume it's because she's too grief-stricken to handle business matters herself. It's the perfect cover. They were right. It was the perfect cover. I had been playing the role of the devoted, helpless daughter without even realizing it. Every time I deferred to Marcus's judgment, every time I'd let him handle things because I was too emotional or too stressed, I'd been building the very foundation they planned to use to steal my father's legacy. Plus, Marcus continued, I'd been careful to document every instance of her relying on me for financial decisions. The paper trail will show a clear pattern of dependence. If anyone ever questions the transfer of control, I have 12 years of evidence that she freely chose to let me handle her affairs. Evidence I'd provided myself. Every signed document, every grateful thank you note, every instance of me stepping back and letting him take charge. I'd been writing my own testimonial to his control over my life. The funeral director's voice echoed from the main parlor, calling for family members to take their places for the service. The viewing would begin soon, followed by the ceremony itself. I would have to stand beside Marcus, accept condolences, pretend to grieve alongside the man who was celebrating my father's death. We should get back, Derek said. Don't want to miss the performance. Performance. That's all this was to them. Marcus would play the supportive husband, comforting his grieving wife, maybe even shedding a few tears for the father-in-law he'd grown to love. And I would play my role too, the helpless widow leaning on her strong husband's support. But as they walked away, returning to the main parlor where Dad's body lay surrounded by flowers and sympathy cards, something crystallized inside me. The shock was wearing off, replaced by something harder, colder. Marcus had underestimated me, just as he'd said. He saw me as plain, bookish, naive. He thought 12 years of marriage had made me completely dependent on him. He was wrong. I might have been naive, but I wasn't stupid. I had a PhD in art history, had managed the catalog for Dad's extensive art collection, had helped coordinate the charitable foundation he'd established years ago. I understood legal documents, financial structures, and organizational hierarchies better than Marcus realized. I'd simply chosen to let him handle things because I'd trusted him, not because I was incapable. More importantly, I knew things about Dad's estate that Marcus didn't. Things I'd never shared because they'd seemed unimportant at the time. Details about offshore accounts, about intellectual property holdings, about the true structure of the trust he'd established. Marcus thought he understood Dad's wealth, but he'd only seen the surface. As I straightened my dress and prepared to join the funeral service, I was already planning. Marcus wanted to play games with my father's legacy? Fine. But he'd just made a crucial mistake. He'd revealed his hand while thinking I was still in the dark. The service itself was a blur of faces and condolences. Colleagues from Dad's research days, families whose children had been helped by his treatments, representatives from the various charities he'd supported. Each person who approached me shared memories of Dad's kindness, his dedication, his brilliant mind. And through it all, Marcus stood beside me, playing his part perfectly. "Your father was a remarkable man," Dr. Elizabeth Warren, Dad's former research partner, said as she gripped my hands. "His work will continue to save lives for generations." "Thank you," I managed, aware of Marcus's hand on my back, his fingers presumably meant to comfort but now feeling like a spider's touch. Dad would be so grateful to know how many people cared about him. "The foundation he established will ensure his research continues," Dr. Warren continued. "I hope you'll consider staying involved with our work. Your father spoke often about your insights, particularly regarding the historical context of medical research." I felt Marcus's hand tighten slightly on my back. He hadn't known about my involvement with the Foundation's academic advisory board, hadn't realized that Dad and I had spent hours discussing how to preserve and expand his research programs. "Of course," I replied. "Dad's work was his passion. I want to honor that." As Dr. Warren moved away, Marcus leaned close to my ear. "You don't need to commit to anything right now," he murmured, his voice gentle and caring for anyone who might be listening. "You're grieving. Let me handle the foundation details until you're feeling stronger." There it was. The same pattern I'd been following for years, disguised as loving concern. But now I heard it differently. Now I understood what he was really saying. "Let me take control so I can dismantle everything your father built." "You're so thoughtful," I replied, turning to give him a grateful smile. "I don't know what I'd do without you." The lie came easily, automatically. I'd been telling versions of it for years without realizing it was a lie. But now, as I watched his face relax with satisfaction, I understood I was looking at a stranger. This man who'd shared my bed for 12 years, who'd held me when I cried about Dad's diagnosis, who'd seemed to support my decision to move Dad into our home for his final months. This man was a fraud. The revelation should have destroyed me. Instead, it was clarifying. For the first time in years, I knew exactly what I needed to do. After the burial, after the reception at our house, after the last guest had left and Marcus had finally stopped performing grief, I sat in Dad's study, surrounded by his books and papers. Marcus was in the living room, on the phone with Derek, no doubt planning their next moves. I pulled out Dad's personal laptop, the one he'd used for his private correspondence and personal finances. Marcus had never shown any interest in it, probably assuming it contained nothing but family photos and casual emails. He'd been wrong about that too. As I scrolled through Dad's files, I found what I was looking for, a folder labeled Personal Insurance, buried deep in a directory of medical research. Inside were documents that made my breath catch. Bank statements from accounts Marcus had never seen. Records of intellectual property holdings he'd never imagined. And most importantly, a detailed letter addressed to me, dated just 3 months ago. "My dearest Margaret," it began, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone and it's time for you to know the truth about your inheritance, and about Marcus." My hand shook as I continued reading. Dad had known. Somehow, despite his deteriorating condition, he'd figured out what Marcus was doing. The letter detailed evidence he'd gathered, precautions he'd taken, and most shocking of all, the real scope of his estate. Marcus thought he understood Dad's wealth, but he'd been seeing only what Dad had wanted him to see. The visible assets, the obvious investments, the patents he knew about. The real fortune, the offshore holdings, the shell companies, the international patent licensing deals, were hidden behind layers of legal protection that would take Marcus years to unravel, if he ever could. But there was more. Dad had known about Marcus's borrowing from my accounts, about his plans to gain control of the trust, about the business loans and investment fraud. He'd been documenting everything, building a case that would not only protect his legacy but expose Marcus's crimes. "I've left you 2 choices," the letter continued. You can follow the instructions in the sealed envelope I've left with my attorney and expose Marcus immediately. The evidence is already compiled, the authorities have been notified, and justice will be swift. Or, if you prefer, you can use the information I've gathered to play a longer game. The choice is yours, but remember, revenge is a dish best served cold, and you have access to an entire freezer. I sat back in Dad's chair, staring at the screen. Even from beyond the grave, Dad was taking care of me, giving me the tools I needed to protect myself and his legacy. But more than that, he was giving me the chance to choose my own path forward. From the living room, I could hear Marcus's voice, confident and excited as he discussed his plans with Derek. He thought he'd won. He thought the grieving widow would sign whatever papers he put in front of her, would hand over control of a fortune he'd spent years positioning himself to steal. I closed the laptop and walked to Dad's safe, entering the combination he'd taught me years ago. Inside, along with important papers and family heirlooms, was the sealed envelope mentioned in his letter. I held it for a long moment, feeling its weight. I could open it right now. I could call the authorities, expose Marcus's crimes, and watch his world collapse within days. It would be justice, swift and absolute. Or I could wait. I could let Marcus think he'd succeeded, let him dig himself deeper into the hole he'd already created. I could play the role he expected me to play while systematically dismantling everything he'd built on lies and theft. The choice was mine. I put the envelope back in the safe, but not before photographing its contents with my phone. Then I returned to the living room, where Marcus was just finishing his call. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his voice full of the concern I now knew was manufactured. "I know today was difficult." "I'm managing," I replied, settling beside him on the couch. "I keep thinking about what Dad would want, how he'd want his legacy to continue." Marcus's eyes brightened slightly. "That's exactly what we need to focus on. Your father built something incredible, and now it's our responsibility to manage it properly." Our responsibility. Not mine. Ours. The presumption in those two words would have been breathtaking if I hadn't already known what he was planning. "I'm so grateful I have you to help me navigate all this," I said, letting my voice carry the exhaustion I actually felt. "The legal documents, the financial planning. I don't know how I'd manage it alone." "That's what I'm here for," Marcus replied, taking my hand. His touch, once comforting, now felt calculating. "We're a team. We always have been. A team." If only he knew that the game had already changed, and he was no longer playing on the winning side. As we sat there in what he thought was companionable silence, I was planning. Dad had given me the tools, but I would decide how to use them. Marcus wanted to steal my father's legacy? Fine. But he was about to learn that the quiet, bookish woman he'd been manipulating for 12 years was full of surprises. The war was just beginning, and Marcus had no idea he'd already lost. The will reading was scheduled for Thursday morning at Dad's attorney's office. I had 3 days to prepare, 3 days to transform myself from the naive wife Marcus thought he knew into someone capable of playing his own game better than he ever could. Tuesday morning found me in Dad's study again, this time with his laptop, 3 legal pads, and a determination that surprised me with its intensity. I'd spent Monday night lying awake beside Marcus, listening to him sleep peacefully while my mind raced through possibilities. He'd kissed me goodnight as if nothing had changed, as if he hadn't spent our father's funeral celebrating his upcoming windfall. The first order of business was understanding exactly what Marcus had been doing with our finances. Dad's letter had mentioned evidence, but I needed to see it for myself. Using the access codes Dad had left me, I logged into accounts I'd never known existed. What I found made my stomach turn. Marcus hadn't just been borrowing against my inheritance. He'd been systematically looting our joint accounts for over 2 years, moving money through a series of shell companies he'd established. The consulting business he claimed was struggling? It didn't exist. The investment losses he'd told me about? Fabricated. He'd been living off my trust fund distributions while funneling the bulk of our assets into accounts I couldn't trace. But Dad had traced them. His files contained a complete forensic accounting of Marcus's activities, documented with bank statements, wire transfer records, and corporate filings. Marcus had stolen over $2 million from accounts that were technically mine, money from the smaller trust Dad had established when I turned 30. The scope of the theft was staggering, but what hurt more was the timeline. It had started 3 years ago, right around Dad's diagnosis. While I'd been devastated about losing my father, Marcus had seen opportunity. He'd comforted me through my grief while calculating how to profit from it. I printed everything, organizing the evidence into neat folders the way Dad had taught me when I helped with his research papers. Then I moved on to the second phase of my education, understanding the real scope of Dad's estate. The numbers were beyond anything Marcus had imagined. The patents he thought he understood represented only a fraction of Dad's intellectual property portfolio. Through a network of international licensing agreements and research partnerships, Dad had built an empire that generated passive income in the millions annually. The pharmaceutical company Marcus knew about was just one of 7 entities Dad controlled through various holding companies, but the real revelation was the structure Dad had created to protect his legacy. The charitable foundation wasn't just a tax write-off, it was a sophisticated legal entity with its own board of directors, endowment, and operational budget. Marcus could no more dismantle it than he could dissolve the Red Cross. Dad had spent years ensuring that his life's work would continue regardless of who inherited his personal wealth. "How's the research going?" Marcus asked, appearing in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee. I quickly minimized the browser window, bringing up a genealogy site I'd opened as cover. "Just trying to organize Dad's family history files. He had so many old documents." Marcus set my coffee down, glancing at the legal pads covered with my notes. "You don't need to stress yourself with all this paperwork right now. After Thursday, we can hire professionals to sort through everything." Professionals he would choose, who would work for him, who would help him hide the evidence of his theft while he gained control of Dad's estate. The presumption was breathtaking. "You're probably right," I agreed, letting my voice carry the exhaustion that was becoming easier to fake. "I just feel like I should understand what Dad left behind." "That's what the lawyers are for," Marcus said, his tone gentle but firm. "Your job is to grieve and heal. Let me handle the complicated stuff." The complicated stuff. As if Dad's life work was just an inconvenience to be managed. As if the treatments that had saved thousands of children were merely assets to be liquidated. "I know you're trying to protect me," I said, looking up at him with what I hoped was gratitude. "I'm so lucky to have you." The smile that crossed his face was satisfied, predatory. "We're partners, Margaret. We always have been." Partners. The word made me want to laugh, but I managed to maintain my facade of wifely appreciation. After Marcus left for his fictional consulting meetings, I returned to my research with renewed focus. Dad's files revealed another crucial detail: he'd been recording conversations. Not just with Marcus, but with Derek, with their friends, with anyone who discussed his wealth or my supposed naivety. The digital files were stored on an encrypted server, accessible only through codes he'd left for me. I spent Tuesday afternoon listening to 3 years of audio recordings, watching my marriage decompose in real time. The earliest recordings showed Marcus genuinely uncertain about Dad's wealth, fishing for information during family dinners and social gatherings. But as Dad's condition worsened and I became more involved in his care, Marcus's confidence had grown. "She doesn't even look at the bank statements," he'd told Derek 6 months ago. "I could probably transfer half our assets offshore and she'd never notice as long as the household bills got paid." He'd been right. I hadn't looked at bank statements, hadn't questioned unusual withdrawals, hadn't paid attention to the gradual erosion of accounts I'd trusted him to manage. I'd been too focused on Dad's medical needs, too grateful for Marcus's support, too tired to examine the details. "The old man's definitely losing it," Marcus had said in another recording, this one from just 2 months ago. "Yesterday he asked me 3 times about the foundation paperwork. But he's still sharp enough to be suspicious. We need to move carefully until he's completely out of the picture." Completely out of the picture. As if Dad was an obstacle to be removed rather than a human being suffering from a devastating disease. The recordings revealed something else important. Marcus had been working with a financial advisor named Jonathan Webb to structure the theft. Webb had helped establish the shell companies, had provided advice on how to move money without triggering regulatory attention, and had assured Marcus that the transfers could be disguised as legitimate business investments. I made careful notes of every name, every date, every transaction mentioned in the recordings. By the time Marcus returned home Tuesday evening, I had compiled a comprehensive dossier of his criminal activities. More importantly, I had a plan. Wednesday morning, I called Dad's attorney. Mrs. Morrison, Harold Fitzgerald's voice was warm but professional. I was just thinking about you. How are you holding up? As well as can be expected, I replied. I wanted to confirm the details for tomorrow's reading. Should Marcus and I bring anything specific? Just yourselves and valid identification. Your father's will is quite comprehensive, but there are some unique provisions we'll need to discuss. Unique provisions. Dad had mentioned in his letter that he'd prepared surprises for Marcus, but he hadn't specified what they were. Harold, can I ask you something in confidence? I lowered my voice, though Marcus was supposedly at a client meeting. Did Dad ever express concerns about Marcus? About his intentions regarding the estate? The pause that followed was telling. Margaret, I think it would be best if we discussed this in person. Could you come in this afternoon? Alone? 3 hours. Later, I sat in Harold's oak-paneled office, listening to revelations that made Dad's letter seem mild by comparison. Dad hadn't just documented Marcus's theft, he'd been actively investigating it with the help of a private detective and a forensic accountant. Your father came to me 8 months ago with evidence of financial irregularities, Harold explained, spreading documents across his desk. He suspected your husband was stealing from you, but he wanted to be absolutely certain before taking action. The evidence was damning. Bank records, wire transfers, corporate filings, everything needed to prove Marcus had been systematically looting our accounts. But Dad had gone further than just gathering evidence. These are amended trust documents, Harold said, sliding a thick folder toward me. Your father restructured his entire estate 6 months ago. The will we'll read tomorrow is, let's call it a performance piece. The real distribution of assets has already been completed through other mechanisms. I stared at the documents, trying to process what Harold was telling me. You mean the will is fake? Not fake, but incomplete. Your father left very specific instructions about how to handle your husband's expected reactions. He wanted Marcus to reveal his true intentions publicly before learning the truth about the estate structure. Dad had been playing chess while Marcus thought they were playing checkers. The will reading would be theater, designed to let Marcus expose himself completely before discovering that everything he'd been planning was impossible. There's more, Harold continued. Your father established a new trust structure that places all assets beyond your husband's reach, regardless of any power of attorney documents he might have prepared. The only person who can access or control the inheritance is you, and only after certain conditions are met. What conditions? You have to demonstrate that you're free from coercive influence. Specifically, that you're making decisions independently of your husband's manipulation. The elegance of Dad's planning was breathtaking. He'd created a legal structure that would protect his wealth while forcing me to confront the truth about my marriage. I couldn't access the inheritance while remaining under Marcus's control, but I also couldn't be pressured into making decisions that would benefit him. Harold, what happens if I choose to expose Marcus immediately? If I go to the police with the evidence Dad gathered? Then justice takes its course. Your husband would face criminal charges for theft, fraud, and embezzlement. The evidence is overwhelming. And if I choose to play along for a while? Harold's smile was knowing. Then your father has provided you with the tools to ensure that your husband's downfall is both complete and public. The choice, as he put it, is entirely yours. I left Harold's office with copies of the real estate documents and a clear understanding of my options. Dad had given me the power to destroy Marcus immediately or to let him destroy himself gradually. Both paths led to justice, but one would be swift while the other would be thorough. That evening, Marcus was unusually attentive. He cooked dinner, opened a bottle of wine, and kept the conversation light. He was nervous about tomorrow, I realized, though he was trying to hide it behind a facade of caring support. Are you ready for tomorrow? He asked as we settled on the couch with our wine. I think so. Harold said it should be straightforward. Good. I've prepared some paperwork for you to review afterward. Just standard stuff to make sure we can access the estate accounts for taxes and expenses. The power of attorney documents. The trap he thought would give him control of everything Dad had built. You're so organized, I said, letting admiration color my voice. I don't know how you keep track of all these details. It's what I do, Marcus replied, his confidence evident. Financial planning, estate management, it's all about thinking ahead, anticipating problems before they arise. If only he knew how many problems he hadn't anticipated. Marcus, can I ask you something? I set down my wine glass, turning to face him fully. Do you think Dad trusted you? With the family finances, I mean. The question caught him off guard. I could see him calculating, trying to determine the safest answer. I think your father appreciated that I was looking out for your best interests, he said carefully. He knew you had enough to worry about with his care. Having someone handle the financial complexities probably gave him peace of mind. Someone handle the financial complexities. What a delicate way to describe systematic theft. I hope so, I replied. I'd hate to think he died worrying about money or the foundation or any of that business stuff. He didn't, Marcus assured me, reaching over to take my hand. Your father knew his legacy was in good hands. The irony was so perfect. It was almost artistic. Marcus thought he was comforting me while essentially confessing to his plans. Dad's legacy was indeed in good hands, mine, but Marcus would never control it. As we got ready for bed, I watched Marcus perform his nightly routine with new eyes. The expensive watch he wore, the designer clothes in his closet, the luxury car keys on his dresser, how much of it had been paid for with money he'd stolen from me? How long had he been living off my inheritance while pretending to be the struggling consultant who needed my emotional and financial support? Big day tomorrow, he said, climbing into bed beside me. Yes, I agreed, settling against the pillows. I have a feeling everything's going to change. He kissed my forehead, the gesture that had once felt loving now seeming calculated and cold. Change can be good, Margaret. Sometimes it's exactly what we need. He was right about that, though not in the way he imagined. Change was exactly what we needed. What I needed. As Marcus drifted off to sleep, probably dreaming about the millions he thought he'd soon control, I lay awake planning my next moves. Tomorrow's reading would be the opening act in a drama Marcus had written without realizing he'd cast himself as the villain. Dad had given me the script, but the performance would be mine. And unlike Marcus, I intended to study my lines very carefully before taking the stage. The last thing I heard before falling asleep was Marcus's gentle snoring, the sound of a man sleeping peacefully because he believed he'd won. By this time tomorrow, he'd still think he was winning. That would make his eventual defeat so much sweeter. Thursday morning arrived gray and drizzling, the weather matching my performance of subdued grief as Marcus and I drove to Harold Fitzgerald's office. Marcus had been unusually quiet during breakfast, though I caught him checking his phone repeatedly, no doubt coordinating with Derek about their post-reading celebration plans. You seem nervous, I observed, adjusting my modest black dress, the same one I'd worn to the funeral, carefully chosen to maintain the image of the overwhelmed widow. Just want to make sure everything goes smoothly for you, Marcus replied, his hand finding mine across the center console. Estate readings can be emotionally difficult. Emotionally difficult. If only he knew how difficult this particular reading was going to be, just not for me. Harold's law office occupied the top 2 floors of a converted Victorian mansion, all dark wood and leather-bound books designed to project timeless authority. We were escorted to a conference room where several people were already seated around a polished mahogany table. I recognized Dr. Elizabeth Warren from the funeral, along with 2 other members of Dad's research foundation. There was also a woman I didn't know, professionally dressed with an expensive briefcase, and a man with graying temples who radiated quiet authority. Margaret, Marcus, Harold greeted us warmly, though I noticed his eyes lingered on Marcus with what might have been assessment. Please, take your seats. I believe you know Dr. Warren and the foundation board members. As we settled into chairs, Marcus leaned close to whisper, more people than I expected. Probably just formalities for the foundation business. He had no idea that every person in this room had been carefully selected by Dad for very specific reasons. The woman with the briefcase was Sarah Chen, the forensic accountant who'd helped document Marcus's theft. The distinguished man was Detective Raymond Torres, working financial crimes for the state attorney's office. Dad hadn't just planned a will reading, he'd orchestrated a sting operation. Before we begin, Harold announced, I want to note that this proceeding is being recorded, as required by state law for complex estate distributions. Dr. Stonehaven specifically requested comprehensive documentation of today's events. Marcus shifted slightly in his chair. He probably assumed the recording was standard procedure, not understanding that Dad had wanted every word captured for potential use in criminal proceedings. Harold opened a leather portfolio and withdrew a document that looked official and substantial. The last will and testament of Dr. Richard Allen Stonehaven, dated March 15 of this year. March 15. Just 2 months before Dad's death, and 6 months after he'd begun investigating Marcus's activities. The timing wasn't coincidental. To my beloved daughter Margaret, Harold began reading, I leave this final testament knowing that my death will bring both grief and revelation. You have been the light of my life, and I pray that what I'm about to reveal will ultimately bring you freedom. I felt Marcus's hand tighten on mine. He was probably expecting the standard legal language about bequests and distributions, not this personal message. I leave to Margaret my personal effects, my library, and my art collection, knowing she will treasure these items for their emotional rather than monetary value. So far, nothing unexpected. Marcus probably assumed this was just sentimental prologue before the real business began. To my son-in-law Marcus Morrison, Harold continued, and I felt the energy in the room shift subtly, I leave my heartfelt gratitude for the education he has provided. Marcus straightened, confusion flickering across his face. Education? What? Education? Through his actions over the past 3 years, Marcus has taught me valuable lessons about trust, deception, and the importance of protecting those we love from predators who disguise themselves as protectors. The blood drained from Marcus's face. Around the table, I could see the other attendees leaning forward slightly, their attention focused entirely on Harold's words. Marcus, you believed me to be a foolish old man, losing my mental faculties and therefore easy to manipulate. You comforted my daughter while systematically stealing from her. You played the role of devoted husband while planning to loot my life's work the moment I died. What is this? Marcus's voice cracked slightly. Harold, I think there's been some mistake, please don't interrupt, Harold said calmly. Dr. Stonehaven was very specific about how this reading should proceed. Marcus looked at me desperately, but I maintained my expression of confused concern. Inside, I was marveling at Dad's theatrical instincts. He'd crafted this moment perfectly, ensuring Marcus would react exactly as predicted. You see, Marcus, Harold continued reading, I've been documenting your activities for the past 8 months. The shell companies you established to hide stolen funds, the forged signatures on investment documents, the systematic emptying of accounts that belonged to my daughter. Sarah Chan opened her briefcase and began distributing folders to everyone at the table except Marcus and me. Inside, I knew, were copies of every piece of evidence Dad had gathered. The total amount of your theft exceeds $2 million, Harold read. Money that was meant to support Margaret's future security while you convinced her she needed to live modestly to help with household expenses. Marcus was staring at the folders being distributed, his face cycling through confusion, anger, and the beginnings of panic. This is insane, he said, his voice rising. Richard was suffering from dementia. These accusations are documented with forensic precision, Harold interrupted. Bank records, wire transfers, recorded conversations, email communications. Your own words condemning you. Detective Torres spoke for the first time, his voice professionally neutral. Mr. Morrison, you should know that the state attorney's office has been monitoring this situation for several months. The room fell silent. Except for the sound of Marcus's increasingly labored breathing. He was beginning to understand that this wasn't just a will reading, it was an ambush. But Richard, Harold continued reading, despite your betrayal of my daughter's trust and theft of her inheritance, I believe in giving people choices. So I'm offering you one now. Marcus leaned forward desperately. What choice? What are you talking about? You can confess your crimes publicly, return every stolen dollar, and accept the consequences of your actions with whatever dignity you have left. Or you can continue to lie and manipulate, in which case the evidence we've gathered will be turned over to law enforcement for criminal prosecution. You're bluffing, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. None of this would hold up in court. He was mentally incompetent, Dr. Warren spoke up, her voice crisp with authority. I examined Dr. Stonehaven extensively during the period when this evidence was gathered. His cognitive function in financial and legal matters was completely intact. I have detailed medical records documenting his mental acuity. The trap was perfect. Dad had anticipated every defense Marcus might attempt and systematically destroyed them in advance. Furthermore, Harold continued, Dr. Stonehaven has left specific instructions regarding the actual distribution of his estate. What do you mean, actual distribution? Marcus's voice was barely above a whisper. Sarah Chan opened a second folder, this one containing documents I recognized from my meeting with Harold. The will you've just heard represents only Dr. Stonehaven's personal effects and sentimental bequests. The bulk of his estate was distributed months ago through irrevocable trusts and charitable foundations. That's impossible, Marcus said. But he was starting to understand just how thoroughly he'd been outmaneuvered. The pharmaceutical patents you were so eager to control? Harold smiled grimly. Already transferred to the Research Foundation, where they'll continue funding treatments for rare diseases in perpetuity. The real estate investments? Converted to endowments for children's hospitals. The liquid assets? Distributed through a complex trust structure that places them entirely beyond your reach. Marcus was gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were white. Margaret, he turned to me desperately, you can't let them do this. We're married. I have rights, actually, Detective Torres interjected, according to the evidence we've reviewed, your marriage may have been entered into under fraudulent pretenses. Knowingly deceiving someone about your financial situation in order to gain access to their assets constitutes fraud in this state. The beautiful irony was that Marcus had been so focused on stealing Dad's wealth that he'd never realized the real treasure was the evidence trail he'd been creating. Every forged document, every false statement about his business, every lie about our financial situation had been carefully preserved. Margaret, Marcus's voice took on the pleading tone I'd heard so many times when he wanted something, surely. You don't believe these accusations. After 12 years of marriage, 12 years of lies, I said quietly, speaking for the first time since the reading began. 12 years of you stealing from me while making me feel grateful for your support. His face went ashen. You knew. I know everything, Marcus. The shell companies, the forged signatures, the fictional consulting business. I know about Jonathan Webb and your plans to dissolve Dad's foundation. I know about your conversations with Derek, about how you've been laughing at my supposed naivety while robbing me blind. The transformation in Marcus's expression was remarkable. The mask of loving concern dropped away completely, replaced by cold calculation and barely controlled rage. You set me up, he said, his voice flat and dangerous. You and your father. This whole thing was a trap. No, I replied calmly, you set yourself up. We just documented what you chose to do. Harold cleared his throat. Mr. Morrison, you have until the end of business today to decide how you want to proceed. Full confession. And restitution, or criminal prosecution. But understand that the choice you make here will determine not just your legal fate, but whether any portion of your theft can be recovered through civil proceedings. And if I choose prosecution? Marcus's voice had taken on a hard edge I'd never heard before, revealing the man he'd always been beneath the facade. Then you'll face felony charges for embezzlement, wire fraud, and racketeering. The evidence is overwhelming, and the sentences for these crimes are quite severe. Detective Torres added, we've also been investigating your associate Jonathan Webb. He's already indicated he's willing to testify against you in exchange for a reduced sentence. Marcus's last ally had abandoned him. The network of corruption he'd built was collapsing, and everyone involved was looking out for themselves. You think you're so clever, Marcus said, turning to me with undisguised hatred. But you have no idea what you've done. Without me, you're nothing. Just a plain, pathetic woman who couldn't even keep her father's attention without playing nursemaid. There it was. The real Marcus, stripped of pretense and revealed in all his ugly truth. Around the table, I could see people recoiling from the venom in his voice. You'll never find anyone else, he continued, his voice rising. Who else would? Want a boring, bookish nobody like you? I gave you 12 years of my life, made you feel special, made you believe you were worth something. Mr. Morrison, Harold interrupted firmly, I strongly advise you to stop talking. But Marcus was beyond stopping. The careful control he'd maintained for years was disintegrating, and his true nature was pouring out like poison from a broken bottle. She's worthless without me, he snarled, pointing at me accusingly. A dried-up academic who never accomplished anything except inheriting Daddy's money. And now she thinks she can destroy me? I'll fight this. I'll take everything from her. You'll what? Detective Torres stood up, his hand moving toward his badge. Mr. Morrison, you're currently making threats in front of multiple witnesses. I'd suggest you reconsider your approach. The sight of the detective's authority seemed to penetrate Marcus's rage-fueled haze. He looked around the room, seeing for the first time how completely isolated he'd become. Every person at the table was staring at him with disgust or professional interest, but not one face showed sympathy or support. This isn't over, he said finally, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Margaret, you have no idea what I'm capable of when someone crosses me. Actually, I replied, standing up slowly, I know exactly what you're capable of. The question is whether you know what I'm capable of. For the first time since I'd known him, Marcus looked uncertain. The woman he'd been manipulating for 12 years was gone, replaced by someone he didn't recognize. The choice is yours, Harold said, extending a pen toward Marcus. Sign the confession and restitution agreement, or face the consequences in court. But you need to decide now. Marcus stared at the pen for a long moment, his mind clearly racing through options that were all bad and getting worse. Finally, his shoulders sagged in defeat. Where do I sign? He asked quietly. As Marcus bent over the confession document, his hand trembling slightly as he signed away his freedom, I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. This was justice, but it was also the end of 12 years of my life. Even knowing that those years had been built on lies, their ending still carried weight, but as I watched him complete his signature, officially admitting to stealing from me and lying about everything I'd believed about our marriage, I realized I wasn't mourning the end of something real. I was celebrating the beginning of something honest. The silence that followed Marcus's signature was deafening. Detective Torres collected the signed confession while Saracen made copies for the official record. Marcus sat slumped in his chair, staring at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. Mr. Morrison, Detective Torres said formally, based on your confession and the evidence gathered, you're under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. The words seemed to snap Marcus out of his stupor. Wait, I signed your papers. You thought confession would make the charges disappear. Harold's voice was professionally cold. The confession determines the scope of prosecution and potential restitution, but the crime still occurred. As Detective Torres read Marcus's rights, I watched the man I'd been married to for 12 years truly comprehend his situation for the first time. The careful planning, the years of manipulation, the confident assumption that he could steal my father's legacy, all of it had crumbled in a single morning. Margaret, Marcus said as the handcuffs clicked into place, his voice desperate. Please. 12 years has to count for something. We can work this out privately, without involving 12 years of lies, I interrupted, standing up. 12 years of you making me feel grateful for your protection while you robbed me. 12 years of mocking my intelligence while underestimating it completely. His face hardened again. You think this makes you strong? You're nothing without your father's money. You'll always be nothing. Perhaps, I replied calmly, but I'll be nothing with dignity, integrity, and a clear conscience. Can you say the same? As Detective Torres led Marcus toward the door, he turned back one last time. This isn't over, Margaret. I'll appeal. I'll fight the charges. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of woman destroys her own husband. Actually, Saracen spoke up, consulting her notes. Given the financial complexity of your crimes and the interstate nature of some transactions, federal authorities will likely want to file additional charges. This is very much over, Mr. Morrison. The door closed behind them with a finality that seemed to echo through the conference room. After 12 years of marriage, Marcus was gone from my life in less than 5 minutes. How are you feeling? Dr. Warren asked gently, moving to sit beside me. I considered the question carefully. Free, I said finally. Terrified, but free. Harold began organizing papers. Margaret, there are practical matters we need to discuss. The house you shared with Marcus was purchased primarily with stolen funds. You'll need to decide whether to pursue recovering it through asset forfeiture or simply start fresh elsewhere. The house, our home for 8 years, filled with memories I now knew were contaminated by lies. I think starting fresh sounds appealing. Wise choice. Your father anticipated this and purchased a property for you through one of his trusts. It's smaller than what you're used to, but it's yours free and clear, and Marcus has no legal claim to it. Even from beyond the grave, Dad was taking care of me. The thought brought tears to my eyes for the first time since his death. There's something else, Harold continued. Your father left specific instructions about the foundation's operations. He wanted you to serve as chairman of the board, if you're willing. The position comes with a substantial salary and the chance to continue his work. I looked around at the people who had helped execute Dad's plan. Dr. Warren, whose research would continue thanks to the patent transfers. Sarah Chen, whose meticulous work had documented every crime. Even Detective Torres, who had ensured justice would be served. They had all been part of Dad's larger vision. I'd be honored, I said. Over the following weeks, the full scope of Dad's planning became clear. He hadn't just protected his wealth and exposed Marcus's crimes, he'd orchestrated a complete transformation of my life. The modest house he'd purchased was actually a beautiful cottage near the university, perfect for someone who might want to return to academic work. The foundation position would allow me to oversee medical research while learning about business operations. Even my social isolation had been addressed. Dad had arranged for me to meet with other women who had escaped manipulative relationships, creating a support network I didn't know I needed. Marcus's downfall was swift and thorough. Jonathan Webb, facing his own criminal charges, provided detailed testimony about the money laundering scheme. Derek, Marcus's brother, was arrested as an accessory after investigators discovered he'd helped move stolen funds. The consulting business that had never existed was revealed to be a front for systematic fraud spanning multiple states. The media coverage was extensive but tasteful. Business journals focused on the innovative legal structures Dad had created to protect charitable work from family disputes. Local newspapers celebrated the preservation of his medical research legacy. Only the crime blogs delved into the sordid details of Marcus's deception, and even they portrayed me as a victim rather than a vindictive ex-wife. 3 months after the will reading, I sat in my new office at the Foundation headquarters, reviewing grant applications for pediatric research projects. Through my window, I could see the university campus where I'd earned my PhD, where I might someday return to teach. The woman in the reflection was different from the one who had discovered her husband's betrayal at her father's funeral. Stronger, more confident, no longer hiding behind modest clothes and apologetic smiles. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Warren. Board meeting went well. The Morrison Research Wing groundbreaking is scheduled for next month. Your father would be proud. The Morrison Research Wing. We decided to name the new pediatric treatment center after my maiden name, ensuring that Dad's legacy would continue under the family name he'd actually earned through his work. Marcus's name would appear only in court documents and cautionary tales about fraud. A knock on my door interrupted my thoughts. Come in. Sarah Chen entered, carrying a folder thick with documents. Over the past months, she'd become not just a professional colleague but a friend. Her work exposing Marcus's crimes had been masterful, but more than that, she'd helped me understand that intelligence and kindness weren't weaknesses to be exploited. Final restitution numbers, she said, placing the folder on my desk. Marcus's assets, Derek's accounts, Webb's fees, everything recoverable has been recovered. Plus interest and penalties. I opened the folder, scanning numbers that represented the complete dismantling of the criminal network that had targeted my family. What's the total? $2.8 million. More than they stole, thanks to asset seizures and civil penalties. The money would go directly to the Foundation's endowment, funding research that would help children for generations to come. Marcus's theft had been transformed into a gift for the people Dad had spent his life trying to help. Any word on sentencing? I asked. Marcus got 12 years federal prison, minimum 8 before parole eligibility. Webb got 6 years. Derek got 4 years plus 5 years probation. 12 years. The same length as our marriage. The symmetry was almost poetic. He's appealing, of course, Sarah continued, but the evidence is overwhelming and his confession was voluntary. The appeal will likely be rejected. I nodded, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Justice had been served, but it was still strange to think of the man I'd once loved spending the next decade in prison. Though I wondered now if I'd ever actually loved Marcus, or just the person I'd thought he was. Margaret, Sarah's voice became gentler, I know this has been difficult. How are you really doing? I considered the question, the same one Dr. Warren had asked in Harold's office. Better than I expected. Sad about the wasted years, angry about the deception, but also relieved. For the first time in my adult life, I know exactly who I am and what I'm worth. Not because of Dad's money or a husband's approval, but because of my own choices and capabilities. It was true. The foundation work had revealed skills I'd forgotten I possessed. The grant review process required analytical thinking that felt natural and rewarding. The board meetings demanded leadership abilities I'd been developing without realizing it. Even the public speaking required for fundraising events had become comfortable once I stopped trying to be invisible. Your father knew, Sarah said quietly. He told me once that you had more strength than you realized. He said Marcus's biggest mistake wasn't stealing the money, it was underestimating the woman he was stealing from. Dad's final gift hadn't been the money or the foundation or even the justice served on Marcus. It had been forcing me to discover who I could become when I stopped letting other people define my worth. 6 months later, I stood at the podium in the university's largest auditorium, looking out at an audience of medical researchers, foundation donors, and families whose children had been helped by Dad's treatments. The Morrison Research Wing was being dedicated today, a state-of-the-art facility that would continue Dad's work for decades to come. My father, Dr. Richard Stonehaven, believed that knowledge belonged to humanity. I began, my voice clear and confident. He spent his career ensuring that life-saving treatments would be available to any child who needed them, regardless of their family's ability to pay. Today, we're not just dedicating a building, we're recommitting to his vision of medicine as a force for equity and hope. In the audience, I could see Dr. Warren nodding approvingly. Harold Fitzgerald was there too, along with Sarah Chen and several board members who had become trusted friends. People who valued intelligence, integrity, and compassion, qualities I'd forgotten I possessed during my years of playing the grateful, dependent wife. After the ceremony, as I was accepting congratulations and discussing future research projects, a young woman approached me hesitantly. Mrs. Morrison? I'm Jennifer Webb, Jonathan Webb's daughter. My blood ran cold for a moment, wondering if she was there to blame me for her father's imprisonment. But her expression was apologetic, not angry. I wanted to thank you, she continued. Dad's arrest forced our family to confront some hard truths. We're in therapy now, working through years of manipulation and lies. I'm starting college in the fall, studying to become a financial crimes investigator. I want to help other families avoid what happened to you. The ripple effects of Dad's plan continued to spread, creating positive change in places I'd never imagined. Marcus's crimes hadn't just been punished. They'd inspired others to fight similar injustices. As the reception wound down and the last guests departed, I found myself alone in the research wing's main laboratory. Through the windows, I could see the campus where I'd first studied art history, where I'd met Marcus at a faculty mixer 12 years ago. That woman seemed like a stranger now, eager to please, quick to defer to others' judgment, convinced that her worth depended on external validation. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. For a moment, I worried it might be Marcus, somehow communicating from prison. But the message was from the university's art history department, asking if I'd be interested in teaching a graduate seminar on the intersection of medical history and cultural preservation. They'd seen my work with the foundation and thought my unique perspective would benefit their students. I smiled, typing back my acceptance. Teaching had always been a dream I'd put aside when I married Marcus, another sacrifice I'd made without fully realizing it. Now, like so many other abandoned dreams, it was being offered back to me. As I locked up the research wing and walked toward my car, I reflected on the journey from that devastating moment at Dad's funeral to this evening of triumph and new beginnings. Marcus had been wrong about so many things, but perhaps his cruelest lie was convincing me that I was nothing without him. The truth was exactly the opposite. I was everything I'd always had the potential to be, finally free to discover what that meant. 3 years later, I published a book about Dad's life and work, titled The Healer's Legacy: How One Man's Vision Transformed Pediatric Medicine. It became a bestseller, not because of the scandal surrounding Marcus's crimes, which I mentioned only briefly, but because of its celebration of scientific integrity and the importance of making medical advances accessible to all. The Marcus appealed his sentence twice. Both appeals were rejected. He'll be eligible for parole in 5 more years, by which time the foundation will have helped thousands of children and trained a new generation of researchers committed to medical equity. Sometimes I wonder if he ever truly understood what he lost when he chose greed over love, manipulation over partnership. But mostly, I don't think about him at all. Instead, I think about the future, the research projects we'll fund, the students I'll teach, the life I'm building based on my own values and dreams. Dad's final lesson wasn't about revenge, though. Justice was certainly served. It was about the power that comes from knowing your own worth and refusing to let others diminish it. As I told the audience at the dedication ceremony, knowledge belongs to humanity. But some lessons can only be learned through experience, that strength can emerge from devastation, that endings can become beginnings, and that the person who thinks they're playing you might discover, too late, that they've been played by a master. The last laugh, as it turned out, was mine after all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.